it's a great honor to follow this band and to be part of your Sunday morning. I feel that every day is a special day because every day is an opportunity to learn something. That's something I'm very grateful for. But today is especially special in that this is the first time where I have had the privilege of giving this talk as part of a Sunday morning service. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity, and I'm especially grateful to all of you for including me in your Sunday morning. Thank you very much. Up until a few years ago, you would have had a really hard time getting me in a church. Legend has it, as a toddler, my parents, who were secular and not religious in any kind of traditional sense, my parents had attempted to bring me to a Christmas Eve Mass to please my grandmother, who was a Lutheran, very devout, and also one of the most gentle, caring, and compassionate people I've ever met in my life. She was my favorite person as a child, but even to please her could not convince me to come into the church willingly. And as the story goes, I was screaming and fussing to the point where they just gave up. It didn't, right, okay, you win, we're not going to go to church, you know, open presents and did all the Christmas stuff. As a kid in elementary school, I recall a school bus conversation where a friend of mine who was Christian asked me where I was baptized. And I said I wasn't baptized. And this kid was like, oh, you're going to hell. He was really upset, and as upset as he also was a little bit sanctimonious, because he wasn't going to hell, because he was baptized. You know, that's kind of the story, that's where it was in his head. And so I kind of responded with a little sanctimony myself, saying, well, you know, I don't believe in hell, so I'm not too worried about it. And if you want to believe in it and spend your life fretting about it, you know, it's on you. And that kind of set the stage for me going forward with my attitude about Christianity. I had an ongoing aversion to it because I saw Christianity as kind of a status quo in a world that I was never very happy with. I didn't have any reason to be unhappy other than the fact that I lived in an alcoholic household and my parents were constantly fighting and constantly miserable, and as a child that affected me. And though my parents did the best in the circumstances they were in, and they both loved me very much, I almost tended to shun that love and to try to get away from them and to flee as far as I could because of the arguing and the alcoholism. So I made that choice to respond in that way. And I saw Christianity as part of that world, as part of something I wanted to get away from. I remember as I grew older, I had friends who went to church on Sundays. I would always avoid sleeping over at their house on Saturday because I didn't want to have to go to church with them. When I got to be in middle school, I went to summer camp, and I went to a camp called Camp Milwaukee, which I absolutely loved. It was a highlight of my childhood, and I really engaged with being at camp. I started helping the counselors out, teaching classes. I helped teach archery. I was a really good swimmer. I was really good at camp crafts. I could lash together forts and things like this. But to proceed at Camp Milwaukee from a camper to a counselor, you needed to go through a program called the RAG program, which I really didn't even give the courtesy of hearing out because the higher rags, or the more, the rags that you had to really work your way up to, which were like a neckerchief you wear on your neck, had crosses on them, which made me think, I don't want anything to do with rags. And therefore, I'm not going to continue with this summer camp that I love so much just because of my aversion to Christianity. Now, when I became a teenager, I started drinking myself. And things got exponentially more severe. From a very young age, I was a violent kid. I was a bully on the school bus as young as kindergarten. In elementary school, I was getting in schoolyard fights quite regularly. Middle school, I added to all of this burglary, vandalism. So by the time I started drinking when I was 14 and got into punk rock music, I was my own little menace to society at that point. And the alcohol was absolutely fuel to this fire. And I continued my disdain with Christianity as, you know, an expression of my rebellion against the world as I saw it. And as a punk rocker, I had an earring that was a big dangling upside down cross, which got ripped off in a slam dance pit, and that was the last I saw that. So I actually got an upside down cross tattooed on my arm with the word amen below it. This was a homemade tattoo, and there's really no way that an upside down cross with amen below would be beautiful, but this is a particularly ugly rendition of an upside down cross because it was a homemade tattoo. But that's who I was. That's who I found myself being as a teenager. And it was in that kind of frame of mind that I came across the idea of racist skinheads. And so here I am looking to lash out at the world around me and really feeling a sense of power from this ability to enrage people and to repel them, which is exactly what the upside down cross was about. I loved it when people saw that. Oh, that's exactly the response I was looking for. I didn't give any thought to what the cross itself meant or what it meant when it was upside down. All that mattered to me was that it repulsed people. And it helped me express the angst that I was feeling. And it also helped me stimulate myself and create my own challenges in life because I was unsuccessful in engaging with any constructive challenges. So it was that frame of mind that led to my involvement in white power skinhead groups. Because if you think an upside down cross makes people angry, try walking around with a swastika. That made people really angry. And again, I didn't give any thought as to why. I didn't give thought to people who experienced their families murdered all over again at the sight of a swastika. All that I thought was that the swastika made people really mad. And it empowered me in a very destructive way to be able to walk around the city of Milwaukee and scare people just by the sight of me. Now, as I got involved in this white power ideology, which initially I did for kicks, the more I practiced hate and violence and put hate and violence out into the world, the more the world gave it back to me. Go figure. I would be walking down the streets of River West, Milwaukee, which is a very diverse neighborhood, with a t-shirt that said white power on it, that big swastika. And go figure, I'd get in fights with black people who didn't, weren't too amused at my choice of t-shirts. But I didn't take responsibility for picking this fight. I would then go to other disgruntled, angst-ridden white kids and go, what's this world coming to when a white man came and walked down the street without being attacked by these savages? Not being mindful at all that I am the one doing the attacking. Now, as I got involved in white supremacist ideology and in hate groups, I had contact with the Ku Klux Klan. And from the get-go, I was never a big fan of the Klan. For one, because they walked around in hoods, which I saw as cowardly. but also because all the rhetoric of the KKK had to do with white Christians. We're here to fight for white Christians. We have a white Christian America. And I would come up there again, now I have an opportunity to start a fight with them. I said, yeah, I'm not white, I'm not Christian. So now what? And they would say, well, you're white, so that's okay. They let that slide as long as the hate was there. As long as I was used the vernacular of hate, as long as I radiated that same misery that they did. I spent 7 years involved in hate groups. Throughout that entire time, I was very much opposed to Christianity in every sense. Even though there is a faction of white supremacists who call themselves Christian Identity, who claim that Jesus was a pure-blooded Aryan white man, and that white people are the lost tribe of Israel, and everyone else is the spawn of Satan. And by the way, if you ever are feeling really masochistic and want to sit down with a Christian Identity person, they will sit there with the Bible and point out all sorts of places in there where they feel these twisted views are justified. They're not pulling this out of thin air. They have their own spin on this very same book that we're able to find such peace and joy in, to justify their hatred. Now, when I was a white supremacist, that made no sense to me at all. I would say, you guys, you know, I hate to break this to you, but Jesus was a Jew. So it's kind of silly for us to be a bunch of white supremacists doing things in Jesus' name. And as I fell deeper into white supremacy, I got involved with a group that called itself a nature's eternal religion, which claimed to be based on natural selection and the laws of Darwin, and the idea that white people had a natural right to fight for their territory and for their sovereignty. Now the problem was, scientifically, we're all the same species. If white people were different species than everyone else, then maybe that argument would carry a little bit of water, but the fact is, all human beings are the same species. So scientifically, we should all be looking out for each other's welfare and not for skin color. But when I got involved in that kind of flavor vehemently, to the point where our white supremacist ideology saw Christianity as the foremost weapon in a worldwide, ongoing for thousands of years, Jewish program of genocide against the white race. Which is absolutely as ridiculous as it sounds. But what the point that we would try to make is, if you were trying to take over someone, and if you're trying to sabotage something, wouldn't it be great if you have an enemy and you can get them to turn their cheek when you're striking them? When you could get them to love you as you're supposedly plotting and moving against them. So this is how Christianity was viewed as part of this paranoid, ridiculous scheme of this nebulous Jewish hive mind that was out to wipe the white race off the face of the earth. Now, very fortunately for me, throughout the time I was involved in hate groups, there were people who I claimed to hate who found the courage to respond to my hostility with compassion. Time and time again, there were black people who, even though I wore swastikas, I had a shaved head, I would use the N-word openly, I was outright hostile to them just because of who they were, because of the color of their skin. And black people, Jewish people, Latino people, gay and lesbian people, all found the courage to treat me with kindness despite this hostility. And while those acts didn't change me on the spot, they did plant seeds that took root and began to blossom despite my best efforts to extinguish them. And so as time went on, and I'm going around preaching racism and practicing hate and violence and getting other people to follow me, I knew in my heart, because these people were nice to me, that they were every bit as human as I was. And that it was wrong to hate them, much less attack them physically, emotionally. So these acts of kindness that were given to me by people I claim to hate were an absolutely crucial part of my process of turnaround. The other elements in that turnaround were my family, including my grandmother, and including my parents, who never ever gave up on me. And as vile as I became, as I was on the news, and as I'm traveling the country, and as I recorded horrible, violent, racist music that was heard the world over, and is still listened to by racists today, my family never gave up on me. They always let me know that I had a place to go, and that they loved me no matter what. Those two gifts in my life were joined by single parenthood. I became a single parent when I was about 23 years old. My daughter was about 2 years old. Until her mother and I split up, I really wasn't engaged with fatherhood. I was more engaged with drinking and fighting and hating people and hurting people. But once her mother left, and I was left to care for my daughter by myself, it hit me at that point that I was all this kid had, and she was really all that I had, because even though my family loved me and let me know that they never gave up on me, I still distanced myself from them. And I still felt alone in the world except for this little child. So I was incredibly fortunate to have these planets align, because the acts of kindness from these strangers alone would likely not have changed my path. My family standing by me by themselves may not have done it. And single parenthood may not have done it. But these three things combined brought me to the point where it made the most sense to leave that lifestyle and that poisonous ideology behind. The catalyst to that was when a second friend of mine was murdered in a street fight in 1994. A friend of mine, another friend who had came to us because he was a white kid in a predominantly black school and was beat up all the time because of it. We taught him to practice the hate and violence that we did. And in 1990, he was out doing that, and he was murdered in a street fight. That made us all go ballistic. I became incredibly more engaged with violence and hatred. But in 1994, 2 years after my daughter was born, another friend murdered in a street fight. And at that point, now that my daughter was in the picture, it dawned on me that if I didn't change my ways, death or prison, where I had lost count of how many of my friends had ended up by then, was likely to take me from my daughter. So that's what caused me to first start walking away. And when I left the white collar skinhead counterculture, I found myself diving head on into another counterculture, which was about as 180 degrees as you could possibly be. It was the rave scene of the mid-90s. Raves were kind of outlaw parties, cultures where kids would break into warehouses with turntables and they'd play thumping techno music all night. And it wasn't necessarily the most wholesome thing. There was a ton of drug use, there was a ton of self-destruction going on, which I was still engaged with. But most importantly for me, the rave scene did have a very genuine mantra of peace, love, unity, and respect. And the rave scene included people with every complexion across the spectrum. of every ethnicity, of every nationality, and of every sexual orientation and gender affiliation. I found myself in the middle of some grungy warehouse in the south side of Chicago at 4 in the morning on a Saturday, shaking my butt to house music, surrounded by thousands of other people who are just amazingly diverse, who are not only getting along together, they're having the best time of their lives. And they're loving each other unconditionally. Now, many of these people in the rave scene happen to be gay. In fact, the music that the rave scene really revolved around, house music, came out of gay bars and the disco scene. And so I made friends with gay people, which was a hard thing for me to do. Because the first time I found myself dancing next to some gay people, I was like, oh, I was terrified. But then I got over it and I understood they were human beings like I was, who needed a place to belong, and who had a much more legitimate feeling of marginalization in society than I did. And as I got to be friends with these people, I remembered things that I did as a racist skinhead. I remembered a night after bar time where I was in a diner and I broke a man's face with my elbow because he had a pink shirt on and he was acting effeminately. I don't even really know that he was gay. But I was drunk and I thought he was. So I hit him with my elbow and I broke his overlip. That's an image that will never leave me. And it was one that stunned me as I was having a conversation with a gay man. And it occurred to me that this man I was talking to, if me and my buddies would have found him in a dark alley just a couple of years previous to that, it would have been quite likely that we could have beaten him to death and laughed about it. Just because we didn't like the way he looked, or because we might have thought he was gay. So I became driven by this remorse that I felt. I became very passionate about the rights of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. And in the 2004 elections, I recall how the issue of gay rights was politicized. And I associated that with Christianity, because the people doing this all claim to be Christians. So once again, I'm at odds with Christianity, now from a completely different side of the fence. I was at odds with them before because they were too nice, and now I'm at odds with them because I think they're too mean. As I'm journeying down this crazy path myself, the one pole that I have is my aversion to Christianity, which remained until just a few years ago. In 2004, I quit drinking, which is another huge turnaround in my life. And my daughter, who was 11 years old at the time, and who had never said anything to me about my drinking while I drank, but after I had been sober for a month or two, she just said to me very simply, "Dad, I'm glad you don't drink anymore because I really don't like it when you're drunk." And that was really all I needed to stay this way. And I haven't had a drop since, and I really don't miss it. What I do miss are the first 11 years of my daughter's life, during which time I was drunk or hungover for the bulk of it. And today, when I work with children and I see young children, I consider that time all the more precious because that time that I could have had with my daughter is gone. This is one of a huge mountain of regret and guilt that I have bearing upon me at any given time. And while quitting drinking was a huge step forward in my life, it was also brought me to the point where I was challenged in a greater way than I'd ever been before. Because now all of this guilt and regret over the time I missed with my daughter, over the people I had hurt with my bare hands, people I had beaten and left for dead, and the countless number of people that I had recruited to follow me and sent out into the world to do worse than I had done. All of that was weighing upon me. I fell into a deep depression where I was just meditating on what a horrible person I was without thinking of the person I was at the time. Without a concept of nowness and living at the, I was getting buried by the regret of my past. I was suicidal for over a year. So bad that I resented my daughter at times for being in the way of my suicide. All I wanted to do was end my life and stop this pain, but I couldn't because of her. It's an indescribably horrible feeling to live like that. And I lived that way for over a year. Until change, which is a constant thing, kind of brought me to the point where I realized that it wasn't doing my daughter any favors to live like that. So I managed to get out of this suicidal rut, but I was still very much engaged in a constant inner violence towards myself. Whenever anything bad happened to me, I figured, well, you deserve bad things to happen to you. In fact, if this is as bad as it gets, you're getting off pretty easy, considering all the people you hurt and all the damage that you've done to this world. And I kind of resigned myself to the idea of never forgiving myself. Even though everyone else had, my family, who were arguably the greatest victims of everything, all the harm I had done, they had forgiven me. I had had friends of every ethnicity, of every sexual orientation who loved me and forgave me, every religious persuasion who forgave me, but I wasn't going to forgive myself. I was very much attached to this idea of punishing myself for the rest of my life. So when I'm in this spot, I'm going to University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I'm attempting a degree in information science with the minor in healthcare administration. My day job is I reboot servers for doctors, so that degree would have been quite lucrative, and I was really enjoying being in school and the whole process, and I kind of ended up taking more sport and rec classes than I did classes toward my degree. One of which was a meditation and wellness class at the Milwaukee Shambhala Center on Oakland Avenue, just about a block north of North Avenue, where I learned to meditate in an ancient Tibetan tradition called Shine. Now what Shine is simply quieting your mind and sitting in stillness and focusing on your breath. Your breath being the most crucial and vital sign of life. If anyone's ever taken a CPR class or an EMT class, the first thing you do when you come up to someone who's in trouble is you find out if they're breathing. That's the prime sign of life. So by sitting in stillness and focusing on your breath, you are living in that moment. You are practicing being present. Mind isn't regretting something in the past or worrying something about the future, but it does anyway. And this is part of the meditation as well. And this is the part that really struck me. Because as I was sitting there trying to focus on my breath, and I'm thinking, okay, there's my breath, and I'm hungry, and I'm going to go to the house for lunch. Oh wait, I'm supposed to focus on my breath. Okay. All right. Focus on my breath. Oh, man, I was in the square today, and that Christian guy was all yelling about Jesus when I was trying to study. Oh, that guy made me mad. Oh yeah, just focus on my breath. Focusing on my breath. And as my meditation instructor put it, when we find ourselves thinking about lunch or about someone who made you mad or whatever, we bring our attention back to the breath as gently as we would cradle a newborn. And without judgment. And as I returned my focus to my breath and forgave these encroaching thoughts, it dawned on me that this grudge I had against myself was really no more substantial than this encroaching thought of what I'm going to have for lunch is. It's all a construct of my mind. And therefore, I really do have just as much control over it. So while I didn't forgive myself on the spot, I did realize that self-forgiveness was possible at that point. And that was another huge turning point in my life. It was from then on that I took my writing of self-discovery and working on my past to the next level, to the raw material that eventually became my book, My Life After Hate. It was also then that I conceived of an organization called Life After Hate, which I relaunched in January 2010. And while I still, to this day, struggle with self-forgiveness, I know that if I really want to make a positive impact in the world around me, I need to forgive myself. I can't go up on stage in front of a high school full of kids and tell them to treat people with compassion and tell them how wonderful it is to live a nonviolent life when I'm violently beating the heck out of myself emotionally for my past. Now, as that realization of the possibility of self-forgiveness dawned, and also as other things about Buddhism started to make sense to me, the fact that change is constant and that we're all interconnected and that all of our lives are intertwined with others' lives and all the life on this earth, I had this moment where I'm like, if everyone was a Buddhist, there'd be world peace. And I wanted to just run around the stalls and grab people by the collar and be like, have you heard the good news about the Dharma? Let me tell you about it. And then I'm like, wait a minute, who do I sound like? And I thought about the preacher in the square AW. I thought about Christianity in general. And it occurred to me that if someone had that same feeling about the teachings of Jesus that I had about the Dharma, more power to them. I have all the respect in the world for that, because it's really teaching and practicing the same thing. Since I have been active doing talks like this and doing outreach programs with kids, I've been incredibly fortunate to travel far and wide and meet all sorts of amazing people who inspire me on a daily basis, many of whom are very devout Christians. I've worked with Reverend Kevin Stewart at St. Luke's Episcopal in Racine, where he offered his entire building for our efforts to engage with inner city youth and to help them focus on more constructive and healthy practices in their lives. And as I spoke with Reverend Kevin, and I saw how he spent Christmas at his church with homeless people, and he kept that place open 24 hours a day so people who didn't have homes could come in from the cold and get something to eat. I saw what Jesus was all about. I saw a man practicing and being a follower of Christ. And it humbled me. And of course, being Arno, I'm like, well, hey, here's another reason to beat myself up. You also hate Christians all those years, didn't you? You suck. Oh. Wait, I'm not supposed to do that anymore. And actually, I don't think that's what Jesus would want me to do either. So, in an effort to empower myself to make the most positive impact that I can, I challenge my old assumptions. And I open myself up to Christianity and to the teachings of Jesus. And I found that the more I open myself up and the more I listen to people like Reverend Kevin, like a man named Father Greg Boyle in Los Angeles, who founded a program called Homeboy Industries, which has changed the lives of thousands upon thousands of inner city gang members, completely turning them around. Like my friend, Father Jeff Winkowski, who runs a program in Chicago called In the Garden Ministries. Jeff and I have had many long conversations where he would tell me stories about Jesus, and I would tell him stories from the Dharma, and we would both walk out of that conversation like floating in inspiration. Just to hear beliefs that we hold so dear validated and reflected by a different spiritual tradition was an incredibly beautiful thing. I've been very fortunate to meet people from all over the world, from every conceivable spiritual tradition, who also reflect these beautiful values and capacities of being a human being. I have a friend named Tahir Malik, who's from Pakistan, whose wife was killed by a suicide bomber in 2009 as she went to the market to get dinner. Tahir walks around the streets of Pakistan, armed with nothing but a Quran, explaining to some very dangerous and very violent people that Islam is not about violence. It also was really inspirational to hear Pastor Johnson say earlier that we each have this capacity for light and darkness, because it was Tahir who said to me once, I find it strange that so many people are so obsessed with trying to find heaven or define hell when we all walk around with both of them in us at all times. And we have the capacity to choose which we're going to engage with. I'm very inspired by an amazing Israeli woman named Rami Damlin, whose son David was murdered by a Palestinian sniper. And within an hour of her son's murder, this woman forgave the man who killed him and founded a group called Parent Circle, which today is 600 families, half of whom are Israeli, half of whom are Palestinian, all of whom have lost at least one family member to this conflict, and all of whom get together to cook dinner and plant gardens and to talk to other people and say we have to find a way to settle this peacefully. Do we? Rahul was very close with a man named Satwat Singh Kalika, who was the founder of the Gurdwara, or Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, who was murdered this past August. Rahul and Party and Armadeep Kalika, who were Satwat's sons, founded an organization called Serve to Unite, which is an interfaith effort to promote the practice of peace and compassion in society, to combat the hate and violence that took Satwat's life and the life of 5 other innocent people that day, by promoting these core universal truths that people of all faiths, or various manifestations thereof, can engage with. I'm inspired by a very good friend of mine named Brian Wilde, who is a gay man, who is, his partner Callan is also a great friend of mine. And Brian has given of himself to help struggling teens who are marginalized in a society where half the people debate their right to exist. And he helps them from a place of literally being at the end of the road to a place where they practice compassion and forgiveness and all the things that Jesus taught to not only overcome their circumstances, but to make the world around them a better place. I'm incredibly fortunate to be engaged with these people. And I'm very happy to say on a daily basis that I am inspired by Jesus Christ. And I'm inspired by Christians. In fact, Christians are some of my favorite people out there. And while I do consider myself a Buddhist, I try to be more Christ-like every day, because I absolutely see these various expressions of faith as all a manifestation of the same beauty of being a human being. Calling that God would be absolutely appropriate, and it would make all sorts of sense. I've come to understand that spirituality is engagement with noble human qualities, like love and kindness and compassion and forgiveness. And I've been incredibly fortunate to see all sorts of means of engaging with these qualities, whether it be from Christians or Buddhists or Jewish people or Muslims, Hindus, Sikh. People of, my friend Brian was like, last night I said, Brian, I'm thinking about mentioning you in a talk tomorrow. What do you call yourself spiritually? Just so I get this right. And he said, I don't know. I try to be a good person. I think there's energy out there. We're all part of it. I think we're all interconnected, and we need to understand that we're all part of the same experience. So whatever that is, that's me. I respect that every bit as much as I respect every one of you, and I respect this cross that I'm very humbled to be speaking on it. And so for me, it really comes down to gratitude. It comes down to a universal truth that is there for us to engage with in whatever means works for us. And I think the more we engage with those truths we become, the more we're able to be inspired by the spirituality of others rather than intimidated by it. A very dear friend of mine is a man named Sammy Rangel, who is a Latino man. He's also a Native American. He was a horrifically abused child. He became a very violent gang member, and he changed his life around thanks to the guidance of a Lakota man who was very engaged in the Lakota spiritual tradition. And I'll never forget a conversation I had with Sammy's uncle, as he calls him, where he expressed to me the idea of drawing in the suffering of those who struggle and then outputting an intention of compassion and love for them. In Buddhism, that's a Tibetan meditation called Tonglen. I'm sure there are all sorts of ways to express that practice in the Bible. To me, I think that's everything in what Jesus had to say. Jesus was the embodiment of taking in the suffering of the world and outputting love. And I'm so grateful to be able to have that inspiration on a daily basis. And grateful for this life that I'm experiencing. And I'm also very grateful to every one of you for listening to me today. Because listening to someone is a gift. And as I'm going through this ongoing process of character development, trying to be a better person, trying to make a positive impact, I'm empowered by all the people who've listened to me. So thank you all so much for that. You have empowered me today with your time and your spirituality, and I'm so thankful. Thank you.
You're welcome.